Yeah. Okay. Again, share the screen. Okay. Yeah. Hello. Hello. Yeah. Let's welcome back. Hello. Hello.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So just now we are looking at these different types of cache misses. Yeah, that means there are different possibilities where the cache in the cache we will encounter the miss and all. Like we can broadly categorize into compulsory misses, capacity misses, and conflict misses. Out of these, the compulsory misses and all like very generic. At the beginning, these misses will we can observe that, and this capacity and conflict misses. These two are like they are like sometimes no they are it's confusing because this conflict misses also will come due to the capacity problem also due to the limited capacity, and because of limited capacity again you can arise the conflicts also because due to limited capacity, and to bring some block into that if there is no space and then we have to replace something, and then the replaced one may be required later on, maybe sooner, right? So in that way, this capacity and collision misses or conflict misses. So at sometimes it will be like very difficult to discriminate actually whether this miss is due to the capacity miss or due to the conflict miss and all. But that is the reason that you can see for both of them, one of the solution is that if you enhance the size of the cache, then both will be addressed to some extent. But the problem is that if you enhance the size of the cache, then the cache access time will be increased, and that will be that affects the cycle time and all because it needs more time because the cache size is larger, then the CPU cycle time required is more, and with that the clock rate, it affects the clock rate. So those are the issues with the if you increase the cache size beyond a limit, right? Okay, so and then coming to the yeah with the different block size considerations, as we have seen, if you have a larger blocks, it reduces the miss rate because of the spatial locality. Because as you have a larger block, then the spatial locality will be enhanced, and because of that, the miss rate can come down. And as I mentioned that if you increase the block size, then there are other side effects also there. Like in case of limited cache or fixed size cache, if you have larger blocks, it contains very few of them. It contains very few of them, and with that actually there will be competition among them, right? So with that also it will increase the miss rate and all. It will increase the miss rate, right? Even if the cache size is very limited, and with that, if you increase the block size, then in that case, cache can accommodate very few of them, very few blocks and all. Then again, it leads to increase in the miss rate and all. It leads to increase in the miss rate. And another thing is the larger blocks. If the block size is too large, then it leads to pollution. Pollution means actually in that block, not many instructions or most of the information, whatever is there in the block, may not be required by the program in the successive like executions and all. Like it means that even though the block size is larger, the program is not using the block effectively. It means that it results to a lot of pollution. That means a lot of unnecessary data or unnecessary information is brought into the cache, which is not used by the CPU and all because of larger blocks. Otherwise, if block is thin, if block is smaller, even though if you bring it some block and if the information is not useful, then but the block size is smaller, then that like unnecessary information that is there in the cache will be less of size. But if the block size is large, then it leads to pollution. That means the data which is in the cache is not used most of the times. And larger miss penalty. As I mentioned earlier, if the block size is larger, to bring the block from the main memory to a cache and all, it requires more time. It requires more time and all. So sometimes that fetching time will override or will compete with the miss rate. Even though the miss rate may be reduced, but To handle the miss and all, you need to pay more penalty. That means for handle a single miss, you need to invest a lot of cycles and all because of transferring the larger blocks and all. So that was the problem with the miss penalty. That's known to be miss penalty. But we can able to handle the miss penalties by using different mechanisms. One of them will be the early restart. So early restart means suppose we have a block of, as I mentioned, we have 16 words are there in a block, and a CPU reference has come. A particular word is required, but that is not present in the memory in the cache and all. Then we have to fetch the block which contains that particular word. So when you're fetching that block, as I mentioned that it has a lot of miss penalty will be involved because there are 16 words, each word has to be bring in and the entire block is to be placed. Then only the CPU will be allowed to fetch the desired word from that. So there are instead of that, early restart means when you are bringing the block into the cache and all. In the process, so whenever the desired word is arrived to the cache, immediately you can pass on that word to the CPU, and later you can manage to bring the later part of the block and all. It's known to be early restart. It means they resume the execution as soon as the required word in the block is returned. For example, in the case of 16 words, your desired word is in the fifth position, for example. And when you are fetching the block, you're fetching word by word or byte by byte, whatever. And whenever you fetch the fifth word, right? Then immediately you pass that word to the CPU for its execution, and then later you can take care about this, the remaining words transfer and all. It's not a barely restart. And similarly, the other one also, critical word first. Critical word first means actually suppose as I mentioned, you require a fifth word in a particular block and that block is not available in the memory, then it results to a miss. So when you are bringing that block into the memory, since you know that this particular fifth word is required by the CPU, so first you fetch the fifth word. First you fetch the critical word, whatever the word that is required by CPU, that you fetch it, and then you pass on to the CPU, and later you can just bring the remaining words into the cache and all, and then place that block as per the order. And all. So that is not to be critical word first and all. Whereas early restart means you fetch the words in a sequence, but your desired word is happens to be like whichever is there. So whenever it receives, then immediately you can pass on to the CPU, starts execution. Whereas critical word first means in the block, wherever the word position is there, you fetch that word first, and then afterwards the remaining words you fetch it from the block. And then after you fetch the entire block, then you can then it will be reordered properly. But whatever the word that is required, first you fetch that particular word and then pass on to the CPU, and it will do in the meantime later on you bring the remaining the other words, right? So by using these two mechanisms, you can able to handle the miss penalty to some extent. But again, there are issues also there. Suppose after that word, the next word is also required. So by that time, again, your transfer is not yet completed. So therefore, again, you have to wait for that. So there are various issues were there uh, in these early start and the critical word first also, right? And now we can see that what is the effect of block size on the miss rate. You can see this particular diagram, and here this y-axis is the miss rate, right? And here x-axis is the block size, and these three plots, these four graphs are plots. You can see that they are corresponds to different cache sizes. Suppose the cache size equals to 4 kilobytes, it's a small cache and all. And if the cache size equals to 256 kilobytes, it is a larger cache. And these are the other variants and all. So here we have considered the four different caches: 4 kilobytes, 16 kilobytes, 64 kilobytes, and 22 to 56 kilobytes, right? And then you are varying the block size from 16 bytes to up to 256 bytes. You can able to see the miss rate, how it is varying and all. Like in all the cases, if you look at here, particularly for a smaller caches and all. So when you increase the block size, the miss rate is reduced. And after that, if you increase the block size further compared to relative to its cache size and all, you can see that again there is an increase in the miss rate and all. That's what we have seen in the previous slides and all. So because this is the miss rate is high initially because of the this one, the compulsory misses. And for that, actually, if you increase the block size, then the misses will come down. The miss rates will be lowered. But at the same time, if you keep on increase the block size, right, size of the blocks, and in case of smaller caches, you have a very little flexibility will be there, or very few blocks will be managed to be there, present there. So therefore, again, even if you increase the block size also for caches of small sizes and all, they will result to further increase in the miss rate and all. That means you can see here the miss rate will be high in the lower size and the miss rate is high at the higher block size. And they are like optimal at a moderate block size and all. But if the cache size equals to larger 256K or 64K and all, then the trend then if you increase the block size also, it will be then the bit rate will not increase that much as compared to the cache size of smaller ones. This is intuitive because here you see 256 kilobytes and here the block size equals to 256 bytes, right? It means that this particular cache can able to accommodate even this higher order block size also. It can able to accommodate 1,000 such blocks, right? Because 256 bytes is one block, and whereas here 256 kilobytes is the size of the cache. So therefore, like 1K blocks, like almost like 1,000 blocks can be accommodated by 256 kilobytes block. So whereas 4 kilobytes buffer cache means it can able to accommodate only 16 blocks because 1 kilobyte can manage to 4 blocks of 256 bytes. So therefore, there are only size equals to 4 kilobytes. So it can able to manage only 16 blocks, 16 unique blocks. And so that's the reason that if the block size equals to small, sorry, if the cache size equals to small, then the higher order block sizes will reduce the performance of the cache, right? So this diagram used to illustrate that the dependency of block size on a cache size. Yeah. Then the cache misses. Yeah, right. When the cache when the CPU refers to a particular address, and if that address is not present in a cache, it results to be miss. If it is present, then that particular memory instruction or whatever the data will be fetched, and the CPU will utilize that. So if the cache hits on cache hit, the CPU proceeds normally. That means CPU will not stall in the pipeline. The process will not stall, or like the execution will not be stalled at all, because the cache access of cache will be like within a nanosecond you can able to do that. If it is present in a cache, you can access the cache immediately and you can able to proceed to the next stage of the pipeline by the CPU or by the processor and all. So normal, that means it will not affect at all. But in case of a cache miss, it stall the CPU pipeline because the instruction when it's execution at some point of a time, right, or at the beginning itself when it tries to execute the instruction memory for the desired instruction, if that instruction memory shows that invalid, it's not, it means that it's not present, or otherwise it's not the one whatever is required. So in that case, the miss will occur. That means we have to fetch the instruction back into the that one, and then we have to start. Or otherwise, suppose when it's a load instruction, for example, and you are generated some address by the ALU, at that address you require the desired solution, desired data or whatever. And suppose if that address is not present in the cache, for example, data cache, so it means that again a miss will be resulted, and again you need to bring that data back and then fill up the cache, and then you have to use that. So in case of misses, basically cache misses and all, you need to stall the CPU pipeline. You need to stall the CPU pipeline. That means the execution has to be stopped. And that leads to, when you're stalling the CPU pipeline, we know that it affects the performance. It affects the performance. That means we have to fetch the block from the next level of hierarchy. Here for cache means next level of hierarchy means it's a main memory, dynamic DRAM. And the misses may happen, as I mentioned, either instruction cache misses or like data cache miss. Instruction cache miss means when you want to fetch a new instruction, if that instruction is not available at that address and all, that is known to be instruction cache miss. Similarly, data cache miss means data cache is accessed by a subset of the instructions. It means either load instruction or a store instruction. So these instructions will handle the data cache, right? because store instruction we used to write into that, whereas the load we used to read from that. So these two instructions will access the data cache and all. So the corresponding misses known to be like data cache miss and instruction cache miss, right? And in the data cache miss, it means suppose there are 100 instructions are there. Out of that, maybe some 20 or 30 maybe the instructions that are related to the load and store, and the remaining may be arithmetic or some other instructions and all, right? So therefore, when you're handling the data cache miss, we have to see that how many instructions are actually going for a data cache, and out of that, how many misses were there, right? Whereas instruction cache and all, there is nothing like every instruction has to be fetched from the instruction cache and all. So that is a direct impact. Yeah, right. Now you can see here, write through. It means, yeah, what it means here is that suppose on a data write, that means here when you are in case in the from the memory, you read it. Sometimes you fetch the data, or you are reading the data, and you are use it by the your processor for performing arithmetic instructions or whatever. Or sometimes you write into that one. Sometimes you are writing into that one. Like for example, in using a store instruction, you are writing into the memory and all. Whereas a load instruction, you are reading from the memory and all. Right. So suppose when you are attempt to write something, at that time it's a hit. It means you're right, you want to write something into a particular address where that address is available, that particular address of the program is available, and where you can able to write into that one, where you can write, where you are storing the result or whatever. So on a data write, if a hit happens, it means that that location is available at a cache and all. Then you simply update that. That means you need to you are writing that into the cache. That means a particular word is either replaced or whatever. You are writing something into that particular location of a block, particular location within the block and all. Then the moment once you write into a block in a particular word location or wherever. So it means that the block in the cache is now different from the block in the main memory, because the block you earlier you read from the main memory and you brought into the cache and all. Now the same block is also available in the main memory. Now when you are writing something into the a particular location in a block and all, now the contents of that cache has been changed on this block, but that block the copy of that block that's present in main memory, that is not changed. So in that case, we say that there are the contents of main memory and the cache are inconsistent with respect to that particular block and all. So always we need to maintain the synchrony between them. Like whatever the cache contains, the copy of that has to be present in the main memory also. But when you write something into the cache and all, so that has to be reflected into the main memory also. Then we say that the data is then in that way the data will be consistent, because afterwards, for example, by using some process, you are handling that particular data and you write something into the cache. And suppose if you're not modified that into the main memory, and suppose that particular content is accessed by some other process, which that expects that the after modification it want to do that, but if it is not done, then we have a data inconsistency and that leads to the errors and all. So to avoid that, whatever you are writing into the cache, that has to be reflected into the main memory, so that the data will be consistent and all. And one way to do that is that write through. It means that whenever you are writing something into the cache, the same thing you have to also write into the main memory also. That's not a write through policy. That means when you're writing something into the cache, it means that the same thing has to also be reflected as to also be write into the main memory also. So that policy is going to be write through policy, but that is involved because you want to write something into the main memory and all. That requires the more cycles and all, right? Because the order of magnitude of number of cycles required to handle a cache and to handle the memory, they are very different and all. So for everything, if you want to write into the main memory, each time when you want to write, whenever you write into the cache, you also write into the main memory, means it's a lot of traffic and slows down the writes and all, right? It slows down the writes and so. But otherwise, no data inconsistency will be there, right? So how to handle that? There is another way, not to write buffer is there. We'll see that. Just before that, let us see that what is the impact of this writing into the sorry, this missed penalties, whatever earlier mentioned. We see that suppose, for example, if a basic CPI equals to 1, that means suppose if there is no misses at all, then the instructions will be executed in one clock cycle, for example, without misses. And assuming that there are about 100% of, so 10% of instructions are stores, for example, if the 10% of instructions are stores, it means that you are writing something into the cache, so that has to be immediately write into the memory also. So for doing that, for every instruction or for every write into the cache and memory together, it takes about 100 cycles and all. It takes about 100 cycles. It takes about 100. So therefore, if you put all together, like normally it takes only one cycle for doing, but if you want to write into the cache, and since to maintain the data consistency, it requires 100 cycles for every instruction, right? Through write through policy and all. So with that, actually, if you look at that, effective CPU will be like, you can see 11 cycles and all. Like one is for normal, like without this one, and if there are any misses or particularly for writes, for example, or even the misses also, writes and all, you have to write into the main memory or access the main memory. It takes about 100 cycles. So 10%, so zero point 0.1 times 100, so it's about 11 CPI are required, effective CPI, overall CPI. That means out of your program, is that 10% of the times if you have misses or if you have writing is required, so in that case your CPI will be increased to from 1 to 11 cycles and all. Right? So that is the impact of the miss penalty and all. Right? If you have 10% misses means then your CPI will be increases drastically. Right? This is just an example to illustrate that how the misses or writes will impact on the overall CPI and all. So it means otherwise in normal case, like in one cycle, every cycle, your instruction will be executed, right? We are putting in the pipeline and all, the instruction will pass through the pipeline. And then almost your throughput will be like for every instruction, like each instruction will be input to the pipeline for every cycle and all. For every cycle, the new instruction will be entered into the pipeline and it will be, it passes through the pipelines, all stages and all. So it will be like on the whole, it will be like one CPI, one clock cycle and all. But if there are misses are there, then it you need to stall the pipeline and then you have to do those handle the misses and all. So that way the CPI will be increased to 11, right? It's almost like 1,000 times more, like 100, like yeah, 10 times more. Yeah, the solution to the write through policy, as I mentioned, write through means actually whenever you want to write something to the cache and all, and you also have to write the same thing into the main memory because to maintain the consistency, right? But with that, what happens? We have seen that if the effective CPI of one cycle, it has been increased to 11 cycles. So that much magnitude, that much affect the CPU performance and all. So to overcome that, one solution is that having a write buffer and all, using a write buffer. It means that we'll maintain a small data buffer in the cache itself. So where if you are writing something, if you want to write something, and then you write first into the cache, and then you start execution. You start the next execution by CPU, and whatever you are writing that, and that word that the word whatever right that has to be written back into the main memory also. But you don't do it immediately. You can put that whatever you want to be written into the main memory. You just place it into a buffer. You place it into a buffer which is in the cache itself. And later actually this then this buffer, whatever the contents of a buffer is, write buffer is there, so that will be slowly placed into the main memory. It's not slow means as soon as possible it will be placed into the main memory and all, and the CPU will execute its normal execution and all. So that way we can handle this the writes and all to some extent by using a write buffer and all. But the problem here is that again the write buffer is again a limited capacity. You cannot keep buffer of larger size. Maybe you can handle 4 words or 8 words, something like that. Suppose in the write buffer is full, for example, then there is no other way, because if you want to write something into the cache and all, you will write that, and again whatever you have written that you will be placed temporarily into the buffer. Ultimately, it has to be reflected. It has to be written into the main memory. but temporarily you are placed into the buffer. But suppose if the buffer is full, for example, because if you have so many writes, the frequency of writes is more. In that case, actually, continuously you are keep on writing. So therefore, the buffer will be full. Then in that case, you have to stall the pipeline and all. Because once the buffer is full, write buffer is full, then you need to wait till the buffer will be empty, and then you have to be whatever you are writing into the cache that has to be placed into the buffer and all. But we had to see that actually what is the frequency of writes and all, what is the depth of the write buffer, and how fast the write buffer will be like done. Write buffer will be vacated by the main memory and all, because you have to write into the main memory. Once you write into main memory, then you can relieve that. You can remove from the write buffer and all. So all those things that depending upon the program and the application, right? All these things will be there. So when you're writing something, the write buffer will acts like a temporary buffer to whatever whatever is written in the cache that can be placed hold by the write buffer and all. But since it is a limited buffer and all, we have to see that it should not be overflow. It should not be filled up. If it is filled up, then you have to wait. You have to stall, and then you need to take care about that. Right. There is another policy known to be write back. There are two things. One is the write through policy, right, without write buffer, and second one is the write buffer using the write buffer. Then another one is the write back policy. So here the write back policy means here whatever, suppose if you want to write something into the cache by the CPU, you first write it into the CPU. You first write into the CPU. Sorry, write into the cache and all, right? Because that address is available, you write into the cache. And then after you write that one, then you know that whatever the block, whichever the block you are writing something, it means that the contents of blocks have been changed. Whatever you brought it from the main memory, and now you are writing something into that, it means that the contents of a buffer, contents of the block has been changed. So that has to be somehow you have to be indicate that one, because whichever the blocks, if you are reading, no problem at all. When you are writing something into the block, so that has to be reflected into the main memory also. If you are reading so many times and all, if the block is not changed, no problem at all. It means that suppose if the entire cache is full, you can safely replace that immediately without any issue at all. But when you write something into the cache, and if it is not done in the main memory, at that time, in the write back policy, what you do is that you employ one more bit, control bit, that used to indicate that whether the block is modified or not. Whether the block is modified or not. That means if something is written into the block or not. If something is written into the block, then that bit will be set. Otherwise, the bit will be 0. So that bit is known to be like a dirty bit. It means that you write something into a block. It means that bit will be set 1. And then when you want to replace that block, that means if the cache is somewhat filled up and then you want to bring some new block, but there is no space, in that case, some block has to be removed. At that time, when you want to remove a block, at that time, suppose you pick up the block where the dirty bit is set to 1. So it has to be rewritten. It has to be written back to, it has to be written, saved onto the main memory also, because that particular block has been changed, but you have not written that into the main memory. So therefore, using this dirty bit, when you are replacing a block at that time, this particular block has to be written back into the main memory and all. That's not to be write back policy and all. It means that in case of write back policy, if you want to write something into the cache, you do it immediately. And at the same time, you just you just place that set that dirty bit so that the block indicates that yeah, here something has been changed. And when you at the time of replacement of that block and all, you try to like you have to save that block into the memory and all. And suppose a long time if you're not using that block, suppose if you are you write something but you are not replacing, but you cannot keep that for a long time because that particular information may be needed for some other process. So therefore, even if you place a dirty bit also, like if you are replacing immediately, then you have to check for dirty bit. Suppose once you modified and you set the dirty bit, and after some time, suppose there is some way you can able to like also you can because dirty bit is set means there is some contents of this block has been changed. So before replacement also this block can be placed into can be saved into the main memory. At that time when you have done that one, then this dirty bit again will be reset, so that whatever the cache contents are there, the same contents are now updated in the main memory also. So this is known to be write back policy. It means that you need not write immediately into the main memory, but you can indicate that cache block as a modified one, as a dirty bit set. And then at the time of replacement, if the cache block is a dirty bit, contains a dirty bit set, it means that you have to store this, you have to save this block into the main memory before replacement. Right, so that is the so cache write back policy and all. So that's what here mentioned and all. Like when a dirty bit block is replaced, that means write back the you have to do that. You have to write that block into the main memory, and then afterwards you have to do the replacement. Sometimes at this time, at this point of a time again, to reduce that writing back into the main memory, if you wish, you can use the write buffer also. You can use the write buffer along with the write back, so that if the dirty bit is set and that is the block you are choosing for replacement, then that block will be placed into write buffer, and then you in that block you just bring a new block from a main memory and then you place on over that block, overwrite that block, because that modified block now it's available in write buffer, and now you have to see this, the contents of the write buffer has to be placed, has to be saved into the main memory at a later point of a time. And again, all these things are very time sensitive, and you cannot place the write block or the modified block a long time on a write buffer and all, because that content may be required by the some other process. So therefore, very limited time these buffers can hold, and after that, if you're not done, then at that particular point of time, it has to be stalled and it has to be managed. That means the write buffer contents has to be placed into the main memory bank. Okay, then another one is write miss. So a write miss means you have a, suppose for example you are executing store instruction, and you want to place some result or some contents into the memory, but that address is not there in that particular block is not there in the cache and all. So then you encounter the write miss. Earlier it's a write hit. That means you want to write, the program has to write something into the location and where that particular block is available, right? And you are writing into that location, right? But again, there is a problem here. When you're writing into that location, again, you have to maintain the consistency, coherence between the main memory and the cache. So therefore, you have to also write into the main memory also. Whereas a write miss means you want to write something into the memory, something into the cache, but that location is not available in the cache. That is, I think that block is not available. So therefore, one policy is that actually using a write through, it means that you allocate, first of all, because that address is not available, that block is not available. So you allocate a memory or you allocate a space for that particular block into the cache, and you bring that block and you write into that, and then you can do the write through and you can perform the write through. After you bring the block, you write that and then you perform write through immediately, or you can use the write buffer and then place it over that. That can be done. And sometimes you don't, this is known to be allocate on miss. That means if there is a miss, you want to write something over that, and then if the miss occurs, then first of all you allocate the space for that, you bring that block and then you perform the write. And sometimes what you do is that you don't allocate the miss, you don't allocate the space into the cache immediately. When you get a write miss, you don't allocate the space into the cache for bringing the block into that. The other way, what you do is that write around. That means don't fetch the block. You write into the memory and then you wait for, because sometimes a program keep on writing in the successive words and all. So in that case, you cannot, or like no, you cannot bring it like word by word or block by block and all. So therefore, if the programs are initially, if you want to write something, if you want to transfer something data, in that case, you can continuously, you will come across these write misses and all. So the one way is that actually here, so you first initially perform all writes on the disk itself, on the main memory itself. Then afterwards, you block that particular block, whatever you have written, that you can bring into the cache if it is required. So that's not a write around and all. It means that you are writing into the in the main memory itself. Don't fetch the block and write over here in case of write miss. In the normal case, it's there's a allocation on miss. It means that if you want to write something and if the block is not there, then you fetch the block, you write into that, and then perform the write over the main memory into the main memory using a write through policy or write buffer. And sometimes the write around means don't fetch the block. You whatever you want to write, you write into the disk itself, write into the main memory itself, DRAM itself during the initialization process or during sometimes data transfer is required at that time. Don't involve the cache into that because that requires a lot of other it consumes a lot of many cycles and all. Don't involve that. Bring block by block and all. And again, the write back policy also the same thing. In case of misses and all, you can have the write back policy also can be used similar to that. Yeah, then just this is an example, just like how the just there is a fast math. This is some processor which used to perform the floating point operations and all, right? For that, for this particular processor, this is uses the 12-stage pipeline, and it contains the data and instruction caches separately, and each of size equals to 16 kilobytes. This is just some numerical example, just to illustrate that and it uses two different caches, and these are the miss rates. Like on instruction cache, the miss rate equals to 4%, 0.4%, and on the data cache, the miss rate equals to 11.4%. So 11.4% means, as I mentioned, no, like on the data cache, only few instructions will be lead to the data cache. Out of those instructions, 11% of those instructions may leads to the misses and all. So when you put together these two together, the effective miss rate or the effective average miss rate will be like a 3.2% you will come across. This is on a particular like a benchmark data set. Benchmark that spec 2000 is a program maybe for performing the, like for example, the multiplication of two Hughes matrices and all, for example. So in that case, if you try to analyze the miss rates with respect to specific block sizes, specific cache sizes and all, then these are the some numerical numbers and all. And now we'll see that for that particular process, you can see here, this particular process is there are 16 kilobytes of data cache and 16 kilobytes of instruction cache and all. And here, this particular processor, it uses the like a 32-bit address, right? And you can see here the numbers over here. You can see bottom. The tag size equals to 18 bits. The tag size equals to 18 bits, and the remaining bits are meant for, right, the cache index, and then the block, like the word index within a block, and anyway the last two bits are anyway the byte offset and all. Right. So from this, what you can see here is that each block is now manages how many words? 16 words, because there are 4 bits are given for like a word index. Okay, this is the block. Like, this was the block, right? And 8 bits are used to indicate the the cache size, that is nothing but number of cache entries and all. 8 bits, right? And there are 4 bits following that will be nothing but, or otherwise the remaining bits this side, lower side, there are 6 bits are there, 0 to 5. It means that each block size equals to 2 power 6 bytes. 2 power 6 means 64 bytes. 2 power 6, yeah, 64 bytes and all, right? So we know that 4 bytes equals to 1 word. So therefore, there are 16 words will be there within a block and all, within a block, right? So the cache organization will be like this. Now you can see here, because there are 8 bits indicating the cache entry. So therefore, the cache consists of 256 entries. 256 entries, 8 bits, 256 entries, and each entry of a cache contains 16 words. 16 words. So therefore, you can see here, this is one word, second word, likewise. There are 16 words are there. That's the reason that the size of the block will be 512 bits. 512, because 16 words are there. 16 into 16. No. How much? Yeah, there are 16 words are there. 16 into 32, because each word is 32 bits, right? So the each block size equals to 512 bits. That was here indicated here. And there are 512 bits, nothing but 16 words, right? This is the way. And now, yeah, this is the standard way, because this is a direct mapped cache and all. So therefore, we have tag bits corresponds to each block, right? And then the valid bit, and this is this mechanism used to indicate whether it's hit or not. And now you can see here, there is we have this like 16 words are there. And from these 16 words, maybe the CPU requires only one word, the specific word, right? So that word is indicated by these 4 bits. That word is indexed by these 4 bits. So therefore, here we have a block means a block contains 16 words. Out of this, only one word is desired word. One word is required by the CPU. So that will be picked up by using a multiplexer here. That means these 16 words are given to this multiplexer. That means entire block is given to multiplexer. From this block, it will just pick up the desired word. So for that, the control information that will be taken from these 4 bits and all. Because these 4 bits indicate the word index. That means which of the word in the block, because the block contains 16 words. Out of this, which word is required by the CPU is indicated by these 4 bits and all. So these 4 bits are taken as a control bits, as a control lines for the multiplexer. With this control information, the from the multiplexer will pick up the desired word and all. So this is the way you can able to design the cache in case of a realistic process like this one, right? Yeah, right. And yeah, just before going to that, just I will mention, like here, you can see here there are 3 diagrams over here. It means that here the way the memory is organized, and other one is that how the memory and cache will coordinate, or how the data between the memory and cache will be like you can will be transferred between the cache and the memory and all. Here, the first case where you can see here, the memory is organized with respect to with the width of word. That means the memory is just organized vertically, where each row corresponds to one word. Each row corresponds to one word, right? And here the cache is also organized as a one word. Cache is also organized as here the block is also contains only one word. So here the interaction between the cache and memory, or the data transmission between the cache and memory, will be done by a bus of width of one word, like 32-bit bus, 32-bit bus. So with that, whatever the suppose if you want to access some words from the memory and all, then it provides the cache will specify the address and all. So with that address, whatever the word is there, that word will be passes through the will be transmitted through will be transmitting through the bus to the cache and all. And with this, it means word by word, it will be transferred and all. It means each word will be separately accessed. So with that, actually here, if you try to see this particular scenario where both the cache and memory are organized with respect to the words, addressed with respect to words. In that case, for example, if you want to fetch, for example, a particular word, if you want to fetch a particular word from the memory, so what it requires is that first of all, we have to get the address which word has to be transferred. So from the bus, one bus cycle is required for address transfer, because the cache will specify that this particular word in this address has to be required. Because if there is a miss, then the cache will provide that address, right? So there is a one bus cycle that is required for transferring for address transfer. And after that, once you know the address and all, and to get the DRAM, the main memory access, and prepare the data for a readiness, it takes about 15 bus cycles and all. It takes about 15 bus cycles, 15 bus cycles. And then once the data is ready, and again it will take one bus cycle to transfer the data. So for transferring one word of data by using the organization, I have mentioned that. So it requires about 17 bus cycles are required. Requires 17 bus cycles. For example, you want to transfer a 4-byte block. A block contains 4 words, for example. So if you want to transfer a block using this particular mechanism, what you require is that for a block anyway, we have a 132-bit address. So therefore, it requires for transferring address, you require one bus cycle. You require one bus cycle. But here it contains the 4 words. Block contains 4 words. So to prepare these 4 words to access these 4 words using a DRAM is I think main memory accessing mechanism. It requires the 4 accesses are required. That means 4 into 15 cycles are required to prepare these 4 words ready for transmission. And afterwards, these 4 words to transfer these 4 words to memory, it requires another 4 cycles, because the actual transmission requires 4 cycles. And for accessing and preparing the data, it requires like 4 times of the 15 cycles. and for address transfer 1 cycle. So altogether it requires 65 bus cycles that are required for transmission of 4 words. For transmission of 4 words. 4 words are nothing but 16 bytes. So therefore, if you try to see that for 16 bytes, it requires 65 cycles. So it means that like 0.25 bytes per cycle, per bus cycle. That means the efficiency, or you can say that the rate of transmission will be this way. Whereas the other one structure you can see here, both the cache and memory, they are aligned. Suppose if the block contains the cache, if a block in a cache contains the 4 words, and if the memory is also organized in the same fashion in the blocked manner, for example, in the block manner, it means that every row corresponds to 4 words, for example. So if this is the scenario, then in this case, if the memory and cache are organized with respect to blocks, and assuming that the bus width is also the equivalent to block is equivalent to block size, if the bus width also equivalent to bus size, block size, it means that there are 4 words. A block contains 4 words, so therefore the bus width equals to 32 into 4. So in this scenario, the amount of the bandwidth that is required for transmission will be anyway for address transmission 1 cycle, and entire this block, the 4 words will be transmitted, will be accessed in 15 cycles. That means for memory access, it requires 15 cycles, and within this 15 cycles, all 4 words will be prepared. All 4 words will be prepared. That the way it is organized like that. And afterwards, since the bus width equals to 4 words, so therefore in 1 cycle, all 4 words can be transmitted to the cache and all. So it requires total 17 cycles. And if you try to analyze that within 1 cycle, how many bytes can be transmitted, about 0.94 and all. And here this is expensive, because you see that you need to have a memory should have like a 4 bytes width and all, and cache also have this one, and again the bus of maintaining the four words width and all. So a lot of it's very expensive, and the hardware requirements and all, it's very complex here and all. It's complex. But here you can able to manage this using this because we don't increase the bus, and the cache will be the normal. And but here if you organize the memory in the form of a banks, if you organize the memory in the form of banks, like where in this with a single address you can able to enable or you can able to access the 4 words in the from the 4 banks together at one when in one axis itself. In one axis itself. So it means that suppose if you organize a memory in the form of a banks, where each bank will be organized in the word fashion, and you can able to read or you can able to access these banks parallelly in one axis time itself. Suppose you want to access a particular row, so you can able to access all the 4 banks in one axis time itself. In one axis time itself. Since the bus width equals to only 32 bits or only 1 word, so you can able to transfer only word by word. So therefore, this is known to be interleaved memory organization. So that means if you organize the memory in the form of a banks, so where you can able to access the all 4 banks simultaneously, like in one access time itself, you can able to enable or you can able to activate all the 4 banks of a particular row So that way, if you use this interleaved memory, you can able to provide the miss penalty, right? 1 plus 15, well, 1 is anyway address transmission, and 15 is nothing but the access time of memory. All banks together can be accessed in single access time, that is 15 cycles. But here the bus width equals to only 1 word. So therefore, since there are 4 words, so to transmit 4 words, it requires 4 cycles and all. So the total is 20 bus cycles are required in this scenario. So therefore, the corresponding bandwidth will be this one. So the advantage of this one compared to this is very expensive because a lot of hardware is required, and it is because providing a bus width of like 32 into 4 lines is also very expensive. And instead, actually, you can use the same bus, narrow bus, and normal cache memory. The only thing is that you can able to, if you can able to manage, if you can able to organize the memory in the form of banks, like you can able to achieve almost like this performance with this simplest structure itself, right? So anyway, we'll discuss this in the next class. We'll stop here at this point. Okay, on Thursday, we'll continue this. Okay, thank you. Yeah, those who have classes, you can leave, and the others and all, if you have any questions, we can interact, no problem. Yeah, let me stop the recording first.